Alrighty, hello every folks, and today we're going to be making another list for my favorite way to experience your tactically ogres, and that would be One Vision. So for those that haven't played One Vision or somehow have managed to not hear of it, the long and short of it is it's an overhaul mod. So basically if you liked other bits of the series and other norms from the genre in general, the One Vision mod comes and brings it to the amazingness that is Tactics Ogre. So you get all of the original awesome setting, plus a lot of the balance changes that the dang thing really needed. Yeah, basically the original, great setting, interesting ideas. Good God, they did not have time to balance that thing. So, we're going to be covering over the many class changes, as well as the many new classes that were actually added to this thing. And all right. So, we're going to be going in, just like last time, a completely random order. There's, I believe, 8 or 9 new classes that were actually added to the game, as well as one that's technically not a new class in and of himself, but he is a uniquely functioning class. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So, as before, we got to start with the Archer. Now, this time around, interestingly enough, now, they've been nerfed. So, Archers used to be the most absurdly overpowered thing in the original version. They were easily the top of the S tier. However, in One Vision, it's not necessarily that any particular aspect of it is nerfed, but just the way that they function has changed entirely. So, basically, they've got several different kind of modes that you can specialize in now. So whether you want to have them, like, let's say you want them to be a debuff spammer or something like that, you've got options for Art of War. You can basically make poison arrows, stun arrows, what have you. Just have them run around with a short bow, just throwing around debuffs everywhere. You want to have your long-range sniper, you basically have your siege bows, which, funnily enough, are made to function like the Dragon Slayer bows from the Soul series, literally even using a different-looking projectile to show their crazy long range. They can basically shoot upwards over stairs and stuff like that a lot easier. You've still got your standard longbows. Now, their damage is not as absurd as before. Whereas before they might be doing like 300 to 500 per shot by the end game, now they're doing like, 50 to 80. It's definitely a lot more modest. However, with tremendous shot and with good positioning, and even with stuff like Strengthen and Breach properly utilized, you can still get some crazy damage out of them, but they're definitely a lot harder to set up. So they're more balanced, they've got more movement range. I should point out, every class in the game, I think like barring maybe only a couple of them, have their movement increased. So anybody that previously had Swiftfoot 1 and 2 automatically has Swiftfoot 1 installed on them. So this basically means that instead of 3 range, archers start off with 4. And depending on the bows they use, they can be either relatively quick or very slow in the case of the siege bows. Alright, so next one that you'll typically see a good bit of, your warriors. So good old basic soldier guys. So their weapon options are expanded by about double. They basically have every weapon available to them, barring like instruments and spellbooks. So you want to have your spear soldiers, you want to have your like spear and shield guys. With all the new weapon options and armor options and everything else available to you, you can do a whole lot of fun stuff with these guys. Now, they're easily one of my favorites still. Again, just the fact that you can have a double strike pike build is pretty hilarious. They've got a bunch of good defensive buffs that they can throw out there. Just very solid class across the board. They've still got their guaranteed crit ability, but that's but the fact that your guaranteed hit in an area is replaced with a action move buff for basically your entire team. Well, it's usually your entire team. You usually tend to get it fairly early, and usually your team's pretty clumped up, so you can get a lot of dodge and true strike out on a lot of people at once. So very solid class, very good availability for all kinds of different options. Whether you want to go lightweight, get some evasion going, go for something a bit more bulky. In some cases, I've seen crit builds work for them pretty well too. You've just got a ton of gear options for them. I believe they've got some of the widest availability in the game. Alright, next is one that some folks tend to complain about when it comes to One Vision, and that would be the Clerics, who suddenly moved up from their previous F tier, which you might notice E and F tier are completely gone for One Vision. But yeah, they're a solid S tier at this point. They're very fast, and bear in mind, this isn't necessarily because their actual, overall class speed is terribly fast. They're only slightly faster than many others, and it's mostly just due to the fact that they tend to have lighter equipment on them. But yeah, their basic heals are fairly cheap to cast. The higher you go, the slower they go. They've got regen on them now. They've got the ability to get rid of buffs on other units. Their Mother's Mercy got changed to Tabula Rasa, so they can basically go and they can get rid of all of the debuffs on one particular unit. Well, actually, no, they can get rid of those debuffs on themselves and another couple units as well, so really strong there. Solid class across the board, not to mention you can even have them be passively offensive, as weird as that sounds. Like, personally, my favorite is just going full light equipment on them. Have a minor buff to their vitality, but primarily going for evasion. Then giving them a claw, and then you just have, like, shield and claw, and then somebody runs up and tries to take out your healer, and they're like, nope, block, poison. It's pretty fantastic. Alright. Next up, in terms of your early availability generics, we got Berserkers. I know, we've got a lot of A tiers going on, but yeah, they're very good across the board. Once again, just most of these will be pretty good across the board. However, their main downside is going to be their defense. I mean, actually, you know, I guess it could be argued that they're closer to a B. So they're probably, as far as finisher spammer units, they're going to be your absolute best. They're very like feast or famine kind of unit. Because if you need something to go all out, like, they can just sacrifice their health to convert to TP, and then just go and drop finishers several rounds in a row. There actually used to be a very abusable exploit you could do, combining Knights and Berserkers, where you would essentially use Blood Price on a Berserker, and then you would have a two-hander, and have them augment air. Just run up slamming Sonic Blade over and over. You combine that with Guardian Force on a Knight, which absorbs their damage, which suddenly means that instead of sacrificing a whole bunch of their health to charge their TP, they're usually sacrificing about a third of what they previously would. So you'd just be able to keep that loop going over and over. Knights would have access to Mending Seeds before, which, yeah, I believe at this point it's actually down to just basic Mend Leaves for them. But still, you would just be able to keep doing that over and over. So definitely, if we're talking offense, they would be in an S tier. Defensively, they're very weak to casters. Now, you can get around this. You can give them stuff like ward shields and things like that. There's definitely builds that you can do to make up for their weaknesses. But they're basically entirely built for offense. You have double attack on them now. So if you want to go double claws or, you know, even double axes. Personally, my favorite is still what I like to call the T-Rex combo, except now in reverse. So you start off, you start off with a claw, and then in your offhand you have an axe. The reason for this, you get an evasion bonus off of the claw. So you basically go, you already have your defensive bonus off it. It's one of the few bonuses that, well, when it comes to your offhand weapon, you've got some interesting stuff that can happen in terms of what bonuses you're actually getting or not. But yeah, if you, like, for example, you just take a swing with claw, you get your poison. You just take a swing with your axe, you get a breach. You have somebody go in and, you know, possibly finish them off. If they haven't already been finished off, or if the poison hasn't finished them off, it's potentially very strong. But yeah, there's a lot of different combos you can go for with them. I've seen one guy going over the amazingness of axe and hammer the other day. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff you can do with them. But they're extremely built for offense, so they have a hard time supporting themselves in terms of recovery. Now, speaking of what I was talking about earlier, Knights. Now, Knights are getting nerfed, I will point out. I do know for a fact the Knights are losing some of their abilities in the next patch. Currently, they are a solid S tier. Like, they're already the best defense in the game. So, unlike the vanilla version with One Vision, all of your stats are generally going to be based a lot more for your gear rather than the inbuilt stuff. But they do still have some class bonuses, and as far as vitality goes, they've got that for days. So you've got heavy armor options, plus evasion options, plus really high vitality, plus the fact they can put regen and fortify on people at the same time. They can strengthen themselves. They can also get rid of stun, frighten, and strengthen themselves at the same time if you need that option. You've got options for... so, as far as basic recovery, like just health recovery, not too great. However, they can get rid of almost any debuff in the game off their divine options right now. They can even exercise, which that's the part that's getting removed. So, after the exorcism, I would honestly still probably leave them in S tier, but But yeah, no, they're, as far as defense goes, the only thing they're really lacking is offense in a lot of cases. But if you go axes, suddenly you've got Breach just kind of passively available there, combine it with Siege, and now you have one of the reasons that the solo has been possible so far. So yeah, it's a very, very, very good class, and definitely not nearly as boring as it used to be. They've got options on options and on options. They are a tad slow, but, I mean, when you've got that much beef, who even cares? Like, you can even combine the sheer bulk that they can get off, like, plate mail and stuff like that. Just combine it with a couple of evasion options, like you go light shield, some leggings, plate body. That dude is able to dodge and tank. It's fantastic. Now, unfortunately, their counterpart, I previously wanted to have this as a C or a B. The Teranite is kind of a D at this point. So, this is with a bit of an asterisk, though. So, previously, when we were talking about vanilla, their big weaknesses were the fact that, well, hell, their weaknesses were everything except their debuff. So they've still got their debuff. You actually don't have to rank up Lament of the Dead anymore. It's just locked at 60% from the start. But yeah, so they've got options as far as their weapons go. They've got a few extra options, including the Bastard Sword variants of the one-handed swords, which is just basically the ones that you can side grade into two-handers. They're like weaker two-handers that can use the finisher set of the one-handed set. But at any rate, so as far as their casting abilities go, they're pretty solid. They've got some good like poison and weaken moves. They've got some health stealing moves and whatever else. And in fact, I normally put them again B or C tier on that. However, the recovery that they actually get off of those health stealing moves isn't too great. Now, granted, they're not meant to be functioning alone. Like, as far as a force multiplier goes, they're fantastic at that. If you've got something at high health, you use your health steal on it. It scales off percentage instead of mind now. So, I mean, like, they go up to a dragon or something like that, they're getting over 100 health back. Your MP leech is, I mean, I honestly don't really see too many folks using that, but it's kind of situational. TP leech is pretty darn good. And yeah, as far as their other casting abilities, they're solid. It's just that they're still very, very, very slow. So usually, if you end up missing with any of the types of moves that you're going for, they're going to feel pretty disappointing. Personally, I feel like they need a very slight RT boost, because I would really want to keep them in B or C here. They're not really... Funnily enough, when I put Terranites and Knights against each other, Terranites did actually win that as often as they lost, so it's funny how that goes. They actually have a counter to the Knights' Phalanx. So the Phalanx is what used to be the Rampart Aura, or the Rampart Shadow, except now it's cheap, and, well, it's basically just more readily available. It's got double the range it used to have. So yeah, they can detonate that. So they can basically turn their weapon attack into an explosion towards the enemy unit there. It just explodes the shadow and all the tiles around it. It's a really cool move. It's very situational. But when it works, it really, really works. But yeah, it's just their speed that really holds them back. I mean, I'm really tempted to just put them in C tier anyway, because they're... Okay, they're comparative D tier. Like, again, there is no E or F or anything like that. But yeah, they're definitely still viable. I just personally would view them as one of the lower classes in One Vision right now. Sorry, need a little bit of a drink because it's getting very dry out. Alright, there we go. Alright, so next up, in terms of our basic classes, what do we got here? Alright, we've got Fencers, another A tier. So, they're renamed to Spellblades, I know. I still like to call them Fencers. But yeah, they've got a ton of options like everybody else, but yeah, they've still got their usual sword and board type setup. They've got very good utility in terms of the spells they have access to. They've still got their old recovery moves from before, but on top of that, they've got a guaranteed hit move, for those that didn't know. anything like Sure Strike or Tremendous Shot or anything else that has a second effect on the weapon is always guaranteed to hit. And since One Vision's weapons tend to almost all have secondary effects on them, well, that tends to be really, really strong, especially when you've got stuff like hammers in your team early on. You throw a bunch of you throw out a Fated Circle, as the ability's called, which is basically a ranged, guaranteed AoE hit. And so yeah, they you just throw them on a couple of hammer users. They run in. Suddenly, they've got guaranteed stun. For anyone using Berserkers by any chance, if you're using a double attack on them, yeah, it's only the first one that'll get the effect. Just so you know. But yeah, very strong unit. They've got built-in item throwing. It's both the Valkyrie or Spellblade or Runefencer, or whatever you want to call them, and the Warlock that have that built-in. Basically, it's the Lobber effect, but they can use it with a shield or a second weapon, or whatever you really want to do with that. So, very solid class. They've got bulky options. They can further increase those bulky options by specializing in Earth or something like that. Again, just for anyone that's not familiar with One Vision, every element's got something going on that's fairly interesting now. Personally, I like going Earth on Spellblades just because that extra bulk allows them to be a very solid frontline support. They've got some of their old Divine support abilities, but there is the argument to be made for other elements, finally. So we've got that there. Alright, next we got Rogues. Dude, this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best class in the game right now. Or at least one of the best. So you might be thinking, hey, they don't do much damage. It's a dude with a dinky knife. What are they gonna... Okay, traps. Traps got boosted, so they will guaranteed do 50% health and usually a pretty debilitating debuff, or they'll have a few other effects on there, like for example healing half of your health, or giving you Ivory Tower, or healing MP, or charging TP, or anything like that. And yeah, it's got 2 range now, and it doesn't have an AoE on it anymore. So A, you're not hitting yourself with it anymore, and B, it can actually be placed strategically now. So yeah, that can be very strong. It may not sound strong on paper, but we're talking a case where they can, like, let's say they've charged 150 TP, they've been doing their dodges and stabs and whatever else with their little knife, right? So you have them specialize towards wind for that knife move, and then you have them run up into a crowd. You have them drop a trap behind them, let's say for a bewitch trap. They go and they take their double attack to go damage, like let's say they go and they cut down a healer for about 2/3 of their health. Sure, they're not done yet, but they've already got Speed Star from the previous turn, so they're already hasted for free. They've put down a trap behind them, and then they've turned around so an enemy runs into that trap. They've already got a natural state of nothing can hit me, so somebody goes up and tries to take a swing at their back, they go and block or parry that mess. Trap goes down, Bewitch happens. Not a lot of stuff can actually get rid of Bewitch. Like Charm, okay, just a regular hit or a lot of other potential moves could ruin that. Bewitch, though, not so much. Okay, so they've got all that. Let's say you have another teammate run up, and let's say they boost the recovery time of the charmed unit to go and finish off that healer. Like, let's say they didn't have an attack to do it. Like, at that point, they've potentially put out 500-600 damage in one round for a class that basically doesn't do much damage. Now they do have other things going for them. The steel tables in One Vision have been updated a lot, so you get a lot of really useful items off it. In fact, recently the solo run I've been doing has been relying a whole lot on being able to steal a whole lot of really high-end items in order to be able to even keep up the budget of that run. But yeah, easily the strongest class as far as I'm concerned right now. Because on top of the crazy damage they can do, they can also potentially heal up to, like right now that class is about 40-ish in that run. So the heal trap is healing him for about 270, on top of another about another like 250, 280-ish that they can get from using a salve. So they can potentially heal over 500 health in a single turn too, which is basically second only to the Cleric using their heal boost. So, yeah, really good. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, the Cleric, whenever they use their heal boosting ability, they actually get Healcraft on there. It's the only time that you have a practical availability of Healcraft for anything you'd actually want to use. Anyway, so that's why rogues are kind of the top of the pile right now, as far as I'm concerned. Sneak attack isn't too great. It's there if you want it. It's basically just a attack that'll ignore defense. Potentially, if you've got some really good scaling stuff, it can work pretty well. Like using a parrying dagger along with the Lombardia or something like that is a pretty strong combo for them. They get really, really good odds of parrying. On top of that, they get really good boosted damage. So yeah, they can transfer in. They can basically transfer in a few weapon skills from other places, like one-handed swords. So yeah, if you had somebody that was already learning swords, they can go ahead and be a pirate. Okay, moving on to the next early classes. What do we have left here? I know we've already kind of gotten into the mid-game classes, but we'll cover them as we'll cover them. Alright, next we got the wizards. Okay, this is with a grain of salt. I'm putting them in C just because of the kinds of options they have available to them. They're very good at what they do, but they are a one-trick pony. They're basically built entirely as a sniper unit, as weird as that sounds. So they've got some buffs, they've got some debuffs. However, Extend, which used to be a very endgame skill before, is now available as one of their first skills, which basically means that they have 3 extra tiles of range for every spell that they do. Additionally, Meditate, which used to be a ranked skill that just kind of went up from like 5 MP going up to 40, is now just locked into a certain percentage. I think it's like 20%, or I think it's like 10% of your MP bar. So you more or less can use that as a very expensive sudden charge, but at any rate, they're entirely built for sniping. They've got no recovery options and no real decent support options for themselves. So on their own, I would say they're a C tier. If you need just straight up magic artillery, though, they would be an A. So, you know, I think we can see. I want to put them to B for that, but it's just yeah. On their own, they're a C. Within the actual team, they're a good bit better. Like long range options, they've got access to the strongest spells in the game as far as single hit power goes. They're very solid. They're very solid for that. Just never let them get hit by stuff. Which thankfully their abilities lend pretty well to that. You can have them hide halfway across the map, just keep spamming Extend and Whirlwind or something like that, and you're solid. Alright, who do we have next? Ninjas. Where do we want to put them? I think like a B tier. So, before, ninjas used to be an S tier just due to their sheer speed and ridiculousness of their hidden bonuses. Now I feel they're kind of a B tier because they specialize in speed. They're very situational in terms of what they do. They've got the longest movement range in the game, which can be doubled. I believe their absolute maximum movement in a single round is like 14 tiles. It gets pretty ridiculous. Actually, potentially going up to 16 if you're running the scout set. That said, their damage is fairly plinky, but they do have a lot of potential debuffs. So, for example, they've got a sleep bomb that they can use as an action move. They have that previously mentioned double move ability. They have a bunch of debuffs that they can put on their weapons, just like before. So potentially you can get some really strong combos going with just different weapon combinations. They're pretty good with blow darts. One thing that can work really well is like a blow dart and a dagger. Sure, you're not making much use of double attack, which, by the way, they don't have access to shields, so that's kind of a no-brainer. I believe you can get a parrying dagger on them, though. But at any dang rate, yeah, they're very good in terms of sneaking in and dealing with 1 or 2 units. Like, for example, if you want to deal with a Cleric, a very solid option is to just go in, you have your standard debuff weapon, use that to get rid of 1 unit, use the sleep bomb on another, and you've got very good odds, it's about 60%, for them to just be able to run straight through the front lines, right into the back, or just sneak them around the map, and just go do what they have to do. Sometimes they may get knocked out, but when you need something done quickly, that's when you use a ninja. So they can accomplish some pretty tricky stuff. I will say, personally, I like the claw and dagger combo on them. It doesn't seem like it would do very much, but it's pretty solid. You can potentially turn them into a little bit of a I forget what exactly I was calling them. I think it was like SWAT ninjas or something like that. But if you go for the elemental staffs later in the game, and then you combine them with a spellcaster setup, and then you just basically have them run around using their burst summons and stuff like that. Their first shot is free, and every shot after that can just use the MP they've built up to that point. And potentially they can be running around, you know, throwing 300 pluses with that kind of spellcasting setup. But it is very random. A lot of their tricks are very random to pull off. So yeah, expect them to fail every now and then, but overall, pretty darn good. Okay, who do we have next? All right, so next we got Sword Masters. Another one. I think I'll put them in B as well. They don't quite have the sheer beating power. They've got some of the ones in the A tier, or some of the sheer support, but they once again are very solid on their options. They've still got preempt. They've got access to 4 different types of swords now instead of just 2 HKs. And yeah, their war dances are actually good. They give out multiple buffs. They potentially remove debuffs. They can potentially give out multiple debuffs. And on top of that, you've got well, preempt as always has just always been good. You've got double attack on them if that's your thing. You can do like parrying dagger and one-handed swords on them. So solid all around the board. They can work for support. They can work for frontline offense. They are one of the few that can use 2 HKs. So bear in mind there was recently another buff to the light 2 HKs, which I personally feel are a little bit underrated. Because true, you can only use their special once, which is basically what Sporagmos used to be. But if you do it right, and you have them running Strengthen, and you just basically run in at just the right moment and use that thing, you can potentially wipe out 3 to 4 units at one time. Not to mention they're very light with only a minor loss in actual offensive power. Sure, they lose a little bit of luck in the process, or at least they used to, they don't anymore. So yeah, potentially very good options there. In most cases, I do like running Swordmasters with Western two-handers, but, you know, your mileage may vary. But yeah, good support, good frontliner, pretty nice B there. Would put it higher, but yeah, I feel like they're happy in the B. They do everything they do at about like 80% of what a specialist would do. So one of the better hybrids. All right, so next we got Dragoons. Where do we want to put you? See, I feel like these are B just because they have to be under the Knight. So Dragoons still have their old Slayer abilities. They're not as necessary as they were before. Like, there isn't a case where, like, let's say Dragons and Beast units are just nigh immortal. But they do have way more options now. So, for example, like, let's say you wanted to throw out like, you have them surrounded. You don't really have a particular melee option you want to go for, but there are some relatively close-by enemies that are weakened. Well, a few of the classes get access to what's known as burst abilities, so they have them. Actually, fencers up here have them as well, but they can potentially throw those out. They have actually, I forgot the ability to fly. Yeah, no, they're absolutely in the A tier. They can ignore elevation for 1 tile. They can, well, they've got a lot of the standard heavy options available to them. As before, they've just got really good availability. Those Slayer skills can potentially come in clutch if you really need them. Actually, one of my favorite builds for them is what I like to call the Riot Dragoon, where it's basically a handgun and a heavy shield. Which, yeah, if you ever wanted to pistol snipe a dragon, there you go. You have that option available to you. But they've got the standard complements of things like Siege and whatever else to boost their attack. Their defense can be pretty bulky. And yeah, just the fact that they can ignore that elevation for 1 tile does make them really awesome for a lot of maps. I just constantly forget that they have that. It's such a good move. They've got spellcasting abilities if that's really your thing. They can actually run cudgels and missile spells and things like that. So potentially some fun to be had there. Alright, and earlier I was actually touching on one little thing here, if I can find him. Here we go. So next we got the Blade Knight. So this is going to be an odd one because he's actually a unique class. So the Blade Knight is a cool idea. I believe conceptually he operates kind of similarly to, if you've played Felseal, how Bizarro works in that one, where you have a guy that's basically charging up a meter for one big attack. He's basically more like a vanilla Swordmaster in that he can only use 2 HKs, but he does get access to heavy armor. He's potentially very strong in terms of single hit damage, and again, Hobrim just does pretty well in terms of making the class work. The only thing is that, yeah, just limited to 2 HKs. He does already come trained in them, to be fair. But if we're taking the class entirely on its own merits, it's very close range. It doesn't really have very many ranged options. He does have some utility off of the Art of War spellbook, and still has access to a lot of the dances, but it's really just range that makes me put it in C tier. Overall, stat-wise, it's an A or a B, but just he doesn't really have any. He doesn't adapt too well to anything aside from hitting stuff up close. So cool class, but yeah, I personally think it's a bit of a C. And again, these are all compared to other One Vision classes. If we are talking compared to vanilla, I mean, if we're talking compared to vanilla, pretty much this would just be S tier all across the board. I probably should reiterate that again. All right, so next up, what do we want to go for? Warlocks, solid S tier. Once again, another class that doesn't necessarily do amazingly high damage numbers or anything else on its own, but they've got so many options. So, like the Cleric, they've got a move that lets them completely get rid of all debuffs. On top of that, they've got Distill moves. So basically, their Distill set allows them to boost their health, boost their MP, TP, or get rid of all debuffs as an action move. They've also got an action move that allows them to push back a unit, basically just like a shield bash at range, that also delays their next turn. Potentially that's very good as a free exorcism in Palace of the Dead and things like that. But yeah, it's very very handy to have if you've got a support team around. In terms of like solo viability, man, those Distill moves are insane. Anybody silences them, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter anymore, because action moves don't get affected by stun or silence or anything. So that's very good there. They've got full access to items. They've got a built-in lobber, if that's your thing. They've got tons of weapon options. They've got tons of evasion options. They're one of the few that can actually run a frontline setup along with a phantom cloak, which is just really, really good in terms of having high evasion and resistance to everything. You've got the Draconic spellbook, which is actually usable in One Vision. So, for example, many of the other spells, they may have an issue actually landing, or they may have an issue actually getting past certain defenses. When it comes to him, they're going to be able to pretty much use their weapon attack as their spell damage. So they're able to get past a lot of defenses. They're able to do a lot of consistent damage. They're able to do a lot of really good buffs. For example, combining Distill Life with Stone Skin was one of the ones that I realized you could actually cheese an entire boss by just sitting there and letting them deflect off. What's funny is, despite the complaint over reflect damage and magic and stuff like that you say come up every now and then, it's actually something that you can very rarely have any possible abusable use for. Because every one of the reflect or any one of the reflect options will actually come with some pretty unfortunate downsides for their respective tiers. But yeah, so very, very solid in terms of being able to regenerate 100 health a turn, being able to have really high evasion, still having consistent damage, having really good buffs. I mean, they're really good. I mean, they can regenerate themselves if they need to, as well as other units. They can fly. That's even before counting the items they have access to. Just very, very good class. Alright, need a bit more coffee here. We'll say this one's a lot more explanation intensive than it was before. And by the way, if anyone's wondering about the music, this is Faraway Heights. As far as I'm concerned, one of the best themes in the game, but anyway. Alright. Next we've got Familiars. I believe they're B tier these days. Not necessarily for their skills. They've got a lot of good skills available to them, and funnily enough, they no longer have gremlin abilities, so that's good. It's mostly just the fact that their defense is pretty awful, so if you've got any agility-based setup, you can usually just have a couple units take them out without too much difficulty. They've got very high evasion. But yeah, if you're built for accuracy, did I say defense just now? If you have somebody built for accuracy, agility is what I was trying to say. But at any rate, yeah, a couple archers can take them out, no problem. A couple close-range units with True Strike, like for example, warriors pretty much hard counter them if they're close by. They're very fragile, but they've got a lot of really strong abilities. Virtuous Dance is still really, really scary. But yeah, solid class, just very fragile. All right, next on the list, we've got good old dragons here. Again, I feel like a B tier these days. They're very strong in terms of their offensive abilities. They don't really have a whole lot of recovery. They've got a lot of bulk to them. It's just that they're very easy to predict. They pretty much all come with bolters now, so they can still do their rock throws. They can still do a ton of melee damage. Disembowel scales at close range, so you've basically got a TP finisher on a frickin' dragon. So they can potentially do a lot of damage, but yeah, if they run out of health, they don't really have too many recovery options for that. Which segues nicely into what would automatically bring them up to S tier, which is, where did I put them? Beast Tamers, where are you? Alright, in their place, since it would boost them in S tier, we're gonna put Beast Tamers in the A tier. Oh, I forgot to mention, by the way, Warlocks, they have access to whips. A lot of units have access to whips. They're better than you may think. Anywho, these guys also have access to whips. But yeah, they come with a bunch of new moves to boost their respective monsters and dragons and things like that, so they can heal them, they can give them haste, they can go and do their previous boost, just like they always have been able to do. And yeah, they can do it all cheaper than before, which is fantastic, so they can actually use those moves with some reliability. So there's a very strong case to be made for hit-and-run monsters just rallying around a single Beastmaster. Good stats just on their own, but yeah, potentially very strong in terms of, well, just in terms of being able to boost their monsters a lot faster than before, as well as properly give them some really good recovery. I believe it's like 50% health that they can actually recover off one of their action moves, so absolutely amazing. They potentially can buff and recover, or even double recover on a single round. So good movement utility there. And speaking of monsters, S tier for the Cockatrice. You might say, hey, it also has the same problem with no recovery. Dude, these suckers are crazy fast and will potentially come in, double round you, and then petrify a bunch of people. It's pretty nuts. They hit real hard. The friggin' Death Chicken from OB64 is back. So no more than needs to be said about that. Like, Stone Circle is horrifying. I'd say Griffins are very close to that, but they're sticking around A tier. Just, like, they're basically a little bit faster than Cockatrices. They do a whole lot of hits, a whole lot of really strong hits, and they're very accurate. However, they don't quite have the mass shutdown potential of Stone Circle or anything like that, so while they can stun, Petrify is just scarier. Not to mention, usually you can snipe down Griffins a bit faster than Cockatrices, because with Cockatrices, their whole deal is they'll come in quickly, so your first thought is, hey, I can do a pretty good amount of damage to that. And that's when you realize that was their trap the whole time, because suddenly you've built up their TP, they've barely survived, they've just dropped a Stone Circle, and suddenly there's a bunch of statues sitting around, and suddenly they fly away and get healed. Yeah, so Griffins are a little bit like that, except they tend to get more in your face and just keep spamming their hook move over and over. They potentially also can eat your wizards, but yeah, I'd say Cockatrices definitely take the top of the pile these days. Alright, next up is one you may not have expected, which is Gamp, the Headhunter. So yeah, Gamp gets his own class. It's a bit like, I would say it's a little bit of a mix of like Berserker and Tamer at this point, which I will say, I know they've got other moves. I personally have to put them in A tier because they're one of the only classes that can potentially double attack with spears. They can have 2 spears. It's fantastic. So yeah, gotta love it. Gotta put that over there just for that reason. Next we've got Golems. See, these can vary. I think in their default form, they're kind of a C. They're their usual wall that they've always been. They can get empowered by Warlocks and any other classes that can use that class, but or any other units that can use that class. However, if you give them a power core, they automatically fly up to S tier. So I guess for that we're going to put them in B. So cores are their customization options. You can have them specialize in any particular stats. And Heaven's Tear plus Power Core is broken. Like, when I went and tested it, I was testing 3 Golems, and just seeing... Or was it 4? I think it was 3. So 3 Golems with Power Core and Heaven's Tear and Tactician 2. I don't believe I had an enemy on them. I'm not sure. But this is when I was putting together teams for the Ogre League, and yeah, they were able to beat the entirety of the Coda 4 final boss fight of Tactics Ogre. And yeah, they were able to do so consistently. Bear in mind, this was originally a team that was supposed to be made up of the end boss of Knight of Lotus, so I thought, hey, you know, Knight of Lotus versus Luck, this should be an interesting boss fight versus boss fight. And then I kept scaling it down because the Knight of Lotus team kept winning, and winning, and winning. And then, it turns out, yeah, it actually was 4 Golems, that's what it was. And then, yeah, those Golems, because I was trying to do the Hell Gigantas from Knight of Lotus, so I figured, you know, Power Core and Heaven's Tear. Yeah, no, them suckers were happily beating Lands and the rest of the Knight Commanders with pretty extreme regularity. So thankfully Power Core isn't something you run into in the game very often, but dude, that mess is... You know what, screw it, we're just gonna put you in S tier. That mess is scary. So yeah, we'll just potentially put you way up there. Alright. Next we've got Cyclops. I'm just putting them in C because they're a good caster class. They're a pretty solid, like, midline caster. A bit similar to how they used to be before. Stuff like Reeking Meatballs is pretty good. It's really just their only downside is just they're not quite as bulky as you might potentially think they are. So they tend to get sniped by archers a decent bit. But overall, pretty solid caster, a bit hardier than your standard wizards and things like that. A little bit annoying to get a hold of, but, you know, they're there. Which actually, speaking of annoying to get a hold of, these guys aren't anymore. So I'd say Angel Knights are a solid A tier now. They're easy to get a hold of. Just once you get into San Bronze, you get to your first few fights, you'll probably see an Ensanguine Rude drop. Congratulations, you've now unlocked Angel Knights. You don't have to go through all of that weird process you had to do before. You don't have to go through surgery or anything. It's just a class mark. So yeah, their song moves are very good. They've, like, all their songs have been reworked into a reversal of sorts. So, for example, there's one that's like, however much MP or TP they have, you fly into the middle of that group, you see a bunch of, like, casters with really high MP and stuff like that. Suddenly you just use the MP move, and suddenly they take as much damage as MP they had, or as much TP as they had, or potentially banishes a bunch of undead instantly. Like, they're very, very strong, and not to mention they're a bulky flyer. They're one of the few bulky flyers in the game, so yeah, very solid A tier. Absolutely love it. Plus, they're one of the few that can actually have a move on their list that allows you to revive. So, very good, very good. Which actually, speaking of bulky flyers, I think we'll go ahead and put one of my favorites over here in the B tier. Now, I should put them higher. You might be wondering, what the hell is this thing? This is Tammuz. So, this is not actually his in-game look or anything. I literally just looked up a picture of a helmet that looks like a bird. He is a unique Hawkman that you get in the neutral route. He used to be the knight with a cool story that you could potentially recruit, one of the members of the neutral trio. But he is essentially an OB64 Raven Man now. But yeah, he can be a bulky flyer. He's got access to some heavy human and most of the lizard classes. And yeah, he's got wings. So what I usually do is turn him into a hoplite. So I figure flying hoplite, whatever, that gets to count as unique. He's a weird, unique situation. And yeah, potentially like sidearms and heavy armor on a guy that you just fly and perch in the middle of the fight, but due to his high bulk, nothing can really hurt him. And yeah, the only thing that could potentially hurt him is the stuff that can't reach him. So very handy, potentially very good for spreading around debuffs you get off sidearms. Like, for example, slow. So with your really good height advantage at that point, since there are a good number of maps that have some very high spires and stuff that they can perch on top of, I can just rain down slowing javelins and things like that, so pretty darn handy there. Potentially can keep throwing out some buffs as well. If you have him running Warrior, So fun one to play around with. He's not necessarily overpowered or anything. He's just fun to use. So that's why he's over there. All right. Next up, well, I guess speaking of lizards, and we've got good old Matriarch Patriarch. The same as before, bulky caster. They don't plink anymore, so that's nice. So yeah, in the vanilla game, you eventually got to a point where they started plinking off their damage, so you tended to use them more for debuffs. In OV, they still retain their casting abilities well into endgame. They've still got their good bulk. They're not going to do overwhelming amounts of damage or anything, but they've got some pretty solid options. I personally, like last couple runs, I personally liked running a Matriarch, so basically you get your Snake Lady. You just give them a nice evasion set with some caster robes and a Caldia, and you potentially got a little Seductress Snake going for all the XCOM 2 fans, I suppose. All right. Next up, we got the Phalanx. Again, they're bulky. They're a spear guy. They've got some good defensive skills available on them. They're not mind blowing. They're not bad. They're fun to play around with, but really can't justify putting them above B. They're not, again, they're good. They're just kind of standard. The Juggernaut, similar kind of situation. Like, I feel like all the lizard stuff is safely around the middle of everything. The Juggernaut's the fast one, the Hoplite's the defensive one, and then you've got a defensive caster. Nothing super mind-blowing, it's just, it's there. You got your lizards, they do their lizard thing. Yeah, not really too much to say on that one. Alright, what's next? Vartan. So this used to be a really low-tier unit, now it's a really happy-tier unit. That's actually your best skirmisher in the game. So skirmishers kind of got punished in the original game, just due to the fact that hybrids in general tended to have a hard time landing any damage in the end game. So the Vartan in this case, you can pretty much run them with any one of their weapon setups, and they still should function just fine. They won't do a lot of damage, but they'll still do damage. However, he's able to throw out all resistance moves at the same time, plus boost his movement, plus just be fast in general. So he's kind of like a regeneration kind of harassment tank, as it were. So he can regenerate, he can max out his evasion against almost anything, and then just keep throwing out debuffs or whatever else. He's one of the best distractions you could potentially put on your team. So yes, he's not very defensively bulky, he's not very offensively threatening. However, you put him on a staircase with like a claw and a short bow or something like that, and suddenly they're evading and spreading poison around everywhere, and then you have them fly away and suddenly harass some nearby casters. So yeah, very solid A tier, best skirmisher in the game as far as I'm concerned. I usually love to have a team of Canopus and Tammuz, because I friggin' love neutral route. You know what? Whatever. Throw out some insults in the comments, but I friggin' love my neutral route. So yeah. Very fun to play with, very quick, very good at self-sustaining. Not very many units in the game are good at keeping themselves going as well as Canopus. Alright. So next up, what else do we got? We actually missed one of the beast units from before, and that'd be Octopi. So they lost Aquavale. So Aquavale used to be absolutely busted. They now actually have to be on water tiles to be able to do anything. Poison Rain is still very good. Aqua Bubble is definitely stronger than it used to be before. Blue Spiral is pretty strong. Like, they're very strong on water maps. Just in general, they're threatening enough to the point that, like, for example, on a solo, them with their normal attacks, not super threatening. Them on a water map, on water tiles, it's like, even on a really overpowered unit, it's very, a very real threat of instant death at that point. So yeah, much more situational, but I would say they're about 90% of how strong they used to be. They just don't really scale up infinitely like they used to do before. But yeah, massive threat on water maps, kind of mediocre rock thrower everywhere else. Alright, and I feel like the Hydra is probably about the same thing. They've got a lot of really good offensive options, but they're not as weak as they used to be. They also inexplicably... oh, I forgot to mention, dragons can fly now. They get access to liftoff, which allows them to fly for one round. So it's like short-range flight that's available to them. Hydras do not have that. However, they do have a lot of pretty solid offensive options. I believe there's discussion at some point of letting them actually have some casting abilities. But yeah, kind of see across the board. They're good for offense. If you want a fun mascot on your team, they're usable now. Their defense isn't awful anymore. You may occasionally see some AI Hydras running around with liftoff. That's just because it's tied to the Dragon moveset. That just means they haven't been updated yet. But still, fun class to play around with. Let's see. I guess then we have the Warden, which I'm going to put on B tier. So the Warden is the new Pumpkinhead unique. It's basically like a mix of the Teranite and the old familiar Pumpkinhead from before. So they've still got their like pumpkin bombs and things like that. They've got all their big heals, which do quite a bit more than they did before. They've got their self-sacrificing pumpkin bombs, which actually remove 90% of their health instead of killing them outright. And they still got their crystal pumpkin, which exercises on hit if it's an undead. On top of that, they've got like a Teranite type setup in terms of their availability. They've got some spells that they can cast off that. But yeah, another fun one. I personally like a build that I did recently that was putting a Wukong setup with a shield on him. But yeah, pretty kind of middle of the road melee class that can have some really powerful secondary moves. So if you wanted a fun mascot, again, that's your pumpkin. They're quite a bit stronger than many other parts in the series, so there you go. Alright, so next up, what do we got here? We mostly have a lot of uniques and stuff left. We actually only have a couple generics left at this point. So next we got Necromancers. These can vary. I personally view them as a C. They can use crossbows now. They have a guaranteed cursed crossbow finisher. Guaranteed hit, I should say. Necromancy is kind of niche as it was before, but they have a few other options. Like, for example, they can, if they're at exactly about half health, they have a move that will scale up in power depending on how close they are to the middle of their health bar. So potentially throwing out hundreds of damage for a close range spell cast. So yeah, if you're using undead, obviously you'd already have one. They're definitely way better than they were in vanilla because, well, you don't need reagents for everything. But still, they're a little bit difficult to get a hold of. You can actually get one Necromancer early on in the game. I should probably point that out. If you didn't know, you can use Steel on Nibith, which you might be wondering, how the hell do you get a Rogue before Nibith? Well, Sarah comes in as a Rogue for that reason. So yeah, you can just go and yoink one of the Necromancer marks off of him, as well as rebuild. I want to say it's rebuild and create undead or living dead that you can pick up in the first chapter. So yeah, you can actually have your undead army going right from the very start if that's your thing. Which, speaking of undead, we got Liches. So they're way stronger than they were before. Offensively, they're a bit weaker defensively, but they can teleport now. They're easier to get a hold of, since you just have to get a Ring of the Dead, not to mention you can get multiple Rings of the Dead now. Good caster item availability, solid, teleporting around and casting and whatever else. Actually, you know what, let's put them in B tier, because there's specifically another one that I want to put above them later. So I'll put them in B tier. While not necessarily the absolute strongest... Actually, wait, are they? They very well might be the absolute strongest. I'll be honest, I don't use Liches very often. Usually I look at them and it's like, ooh, look, teleporting skeleton, that's fun. So yeah. We'll go ahead and leave you in the A tier then. And then, let's see, for I believe the last of our generic classes here, we've got the Fusilier, or Fusilier. Where do we want to put you? I kind of feel like they're... yeah, I feel like they're a B. So they've got a disarm move that allows them to do a long-range shackle. They've got their guns like they've always had. And they've got very good attack. They can ignore terrain. They're fairly slow. But yeah, overall, fairly solid class. Their barricades actually block 2 tiles now, so that's potentially very funny to see the AI messing with. Because suddenly you show up to the beach map, you run into a Fusilier, and that sucker has turned into frickin' D-Day. So yeah, very fun class to play with. They don't really do anything for elemental options. They're pretty weak to casters. I guess I'm kind of tempted to put them in C tier, actually, for that reason. So they've got a lot of vulnerabilities. But yeah, guns are potentially very strong in the end game, so just keep them at long range and you're just fine. However, moving into those uniques, then we've got Lindell coming in with his commando class. So it's basically a mix of the ninja, the archer, and the fusilier. So previously, gunblades used to be a buccaneer thing. They are actually now a commando thing. So he's exclusively got access to gunblades. On top of that, he can use all of the grenade-type moves a lot faster. So shots got remade into grenades, which are your flashbangs, your muster bombs, and your tear gas for silence, stun, and poison. Not in that particular order, by the way. I set them in a different order. But yeah, he's really dang strong for spreading around debuffs. He doesn't have access to all of the Fusilier moves, but yeah, he's kind of a trickster class. It's the best way to put it. He does pretty okay with a gunblade. Personally, I feel like pistol and shield is probably a bit stronger on him. But yeah, if you really want gunblades, there you go. They're a pretty solid option for him. Now, unfortunately, all those grenade moves and whatever else are part of the Art of War spellbook instead of being any kind of action move or anything else. So I feel like their turn utility is a little bit lower than, like, let's say something like a ninja, but they do have a lot of options in terms of spreading around mass debuffs. Like, for example, throwing out the tear gas for silence to get rid of 2 clerics at one time, pretty solid. Throwing out like a flashbang for a mass stun on front lines, pretty strong. And throwing out a muster bomb for some mass poison could potentially be very devastating as well. If you hear a noise in the background, sorry, my dog has just realized that somebody was going off to work and he's just not having it. Okay. So next up on the list, speaking of oddly specific unique classes, we've got the Geomancer, which personally I'd throw into S tier. So the sisters get access to Geomancer. It's basically a melee and melee caster type setup. All of their spells are limited to, just like the FFT Geomancer, limited to the type of tile that they're standing on. I have no idea how Rakes got that working, because apparently that's a thing that's tracked in terms of actual unit values. Like, I know each different tile has its own effects and everything, but I never would have thought that actually was a thing that would be doable. Here's the thing. For some reason, now, let me double check this real quick, because it seemed very strange to me when I was testing this earlier. And now that I think about it, I really should double check this before I say for sure. Yeah, okay, so they can actually, okay, they can learn Gorge and Lock. So they can do what the Knight used to be able to do, wherein they can just run up, slap somebody, and become just invincible. So yeah, Gorge and Lock is ridiculously strong. They've got Lockdown as well, which allows them to do a mass shackle. On top of that, they've got their spell casting abilities. On top of that, they've got all of their other moves here. So yeah, just the fact that they have access to Gorge and Lock is kind of ridiculous, since why the hell would anyone have... I don't think Gorge and Key is even a move that exists anymore. So yeah, easily the bulkiest frontline unit in the game, funnily enough. I mean, yeah, only a couple of characters can actually use it, but still, really strong class. It's kind of terrifyingly strong, to be honest. Alright, so next up, we got Oshon with the Dragonborn. So, I'm gonna put that in B. Reason being, so they're like a physical class that's got a bunch of shout moves, so they can make themselves run fast. They can mass push back a bunch of units, which, by the way, is hilarious in Palace of the Dead. Is you just run over to a cliff and suddenly just instantly exercise 4 units at once. It's great. But yeah, really fun class to play around with. I wouldn't say they're particularly devastating or anything, but they are pretty fun. Like, they're definitely a gimmick, but they're fun to play with. They're not weak. They're not overwhelming. Their boulder moves, they basically attack like a dragon would, so they've got a rake at close range, they've got a rock throw at long range. Very strong. Not like super threateningly strong, but, you know, pretty solid. Alright, next up we got the Summoner here. So Cressida is a new unique class. It's another one that's it's an FFT reference. It's fun to play around with. They get access to all the summon moves, so both ninja and elemental summons. They can render themselves temporarily immune to I think it was to physical damage, wasn't it? I will say some of the unique newer classes I haven't necessarily played around with too much, just because there were so many of them that came out in so short of a time that I didn't really get a chance to look over all of them as thoroughly with a lot of runs as you normally would. And yeah, so they have access to Decoy, so they get access to Art of War, which allows them to use their ninja summons. But yeah, they can also use Decoy, so you can have them just kind of sit around and build up MP for some of those big hits. They do have some insanely strong potential casting hits. On top of that, they have Grim Dawn, which I believe is another Felseal reference. Actually, wait, we haven't gotten to the first Felseal reference. Dang it. But yeah, it's basically a mass, like, it's a map-wide Frighten move, pretty much. So potentially very strong there, which yeah, so fun gimmick class. Actually, I feel like they need to be an A tier. That's pretty dang strong as far as their options go. Like, just the fact that they can put out a decoy when they need to build up MP is pretty strong for options. Now, speaking of Felseal references, we're going to go ahead and put the put the priest up here as well. So they actually have a move called Felseal that allows you to disable undead units that are on the ground. So basically, like a cleric or whatever else. However, they are more specialized towards offense, and they actually have an exorcism finisher on a pistol if you want to have them use that. So yes, they can also use guns. It's a little hilarious. Apparently, it's a... Oh, hang on just a moment. Alright, let's continue on here. So, next up we got a few more interesting ones. So, Knight Commander, I will say, probably still goes in S tier. Now, she's not as busted as she was. That's absolutely clear. So, she doesn't have her speed bonus that she used to have before. She doesn't really have as many of the crazy busted things she used to have before, but she is definitely more utilitarian now. For example, another one of the classes that could potentially double attack with spears while also petrifying on an action move. So she has basically what used to be Evil Eye. So it got reworked into a move called Bloody Mary, which she can basically stare into anybody and make them petrified as long as they don't have a shield. Funny part is, they actually made this as a joke originally that ended up working out pretty well. The joke being that she can stare at anybody to petrify them, which works pretty well with Hobrim as her husband because he's blind. Anyway, so solid class there. Can use double spears. Definitely gets put up at the top of the tier list for that. But one of the classes that I found was actually potentially able to take on 20 units right out of the gate. Not easily, mind you. It was pretty difficult to do that. But yeah, if you've got a ton of endgame equipment and a ton of patience, then you could potentially pull off a 1 vs 20 with with a Knight Commander there. So that's pretty fun. Next up, we got the Paragon. This one arguably should be a bit higher, but I personally just put them on the C tier just because, dude, Ravenous is such a pain in the butt to get a hold of. So yeah, you gotta save her 3 separate times in order to get her class. She's basically Agrius from FFT if she was balanced. So yeah, she's got a lot of the same moves. So like, for example, Shell Bust, which is a breach and removes buffs. Or you've got Knot Stasis Blade, basically. I forget what the exact names of all these were, but yeah, you basically got like a Knot Stasis Blade, a Knot Crush Punch. We got a bunch of different moves like that, just throwing out different debuffs and whatever else. Pretty much built to be spec'd for Aug Light, as everything goes. Entirely built for one-handed swords. Again, she is an FFT reference class right now. But yeah, fun to play around with. I wouldn't say she's overly threatening, but she does have some fun, unique moves. She's fun to play with if you're going down the law route. Yeah, so that's kind of where that goes, at least how I feel. Alright, next, let's see, next we got Buccaneer. I feel like he's got to be an S tier as well. So while he has seen some nerfs, The Buccaneer is still, as far as I'm concerned, the best 1v1 unit in the game. He's got the highest dex of any class. He's got some very good evasion and very good equipment options, as well as some Lizardman options in his skill set. Basically, yeah, when it comes to like a duelist kind of build, he is absolutely the guy for that. On top of that, he's one of the only ones that can successfully pull off a pistol and sword build. Which, yeah, unlike vanilla, he can actually do damage with that, so that's pretty fun. Now, you might be wondering, why would you potentially do that? You're giving up a shield. I mean, yes, but you can make his evasion really high as it is, and on top of that, having a pistol in the offhand is pretty handy in the later game. Like, for example, when you're getting a lot of counters and things like that. See, pistols have extended range from where they had it before. A lot of stuff in the endgame uses sidearms and whatever else that is within pistol range. So potentially, sure, they're countering at close range with a sword, but they're also countering at close range with a gun. So this means that if you put them in front, you give them really high evasion plus evade. I'm trying to remember. I have a feeling they actually got evade removed, but even if they did, whatever, it still would be in the same place. But, for example, yeah, they're countering with their sword, they get a guy for about half their health, they get shot at with, like, a sidearm or a short bow or a blow dart or something. They go and they block that mess, and then they finish the guy off with a pistol. It's pretty darn strong, so, yeah, personally really love that one. Solid S tier in my book. Which actually, similar thing here for the Ranger. Personally, I like to go with what I call the Guardsman build for him, which is basically sword, board, and medium armor. He's got a teleport move, so what's funny is there's a reference to how he tends to function in the plot. So at any point, he can just go and teleport himself behind somebody and assassinate them. Potentially very strong move. It's like an upgraded version of sneak attack that comes with a built-in warp ability. So yeah, very strong options for like a just assassin type build there. You still get access to his longbows like you did from before. So yeah, solid S tier, pretty decent stats, pretty good strong moves, and yeah, that assassination move is pretty darn good, is the thing. In fact, I've heard some folks argue that it was one of the best moves in the game, but either way, it's very versatile, very strong, so he's there now. Alright, next we got Senor Hamilton, who, he's good. He's not bad by any means. The Paladin is still pretty solid. You know what, in fact, I feel obligated to put him in D tier, because still, you get him like 20 minutes before the end of the game. His class isn't bad. He's got really good buffs and everything, but yeah, no. I'm sorry. It's just, it doesn't matter how good the class is. It could be the best class in the game. You get him so far close to the end of the game that, that I could never reasonably put it any higher. But yeah, so he's still hanging out down there. Next we got White Knights. Absolute S tier. This is the main reason that, like, if there was an S plus tier, they would be going above Knights right now. In fact, I almost feel like Knights should be... No, Knights are still S tier. So, they've... So, okay, their weapon buff, they can... So, Consecrate Blade is basically... So, it's a light buff plus Strengthen plus... what the hell was the other one? Plus Fortify, I believe. Or no, plus True Strike. So basically, they're guaranteed to hit pretty much. They're going to be doing bonus damage. They're going to be doing more bonus damage. Funny part is, one of the big weaknesses to builds like that is the fact that A, they have to counter stuff like Weaken, and B, the fact that they would potentially get dispelled if they put a buff out there. Thing is, if they get dispelled and let's say they had it active from a previous turn, it'll get rid of Instill Light before it gets rid of Strengthen most of the time. If, for example, so yeah, basically you just kind of accidentally counter Dispel, which there really wasn't too much damage that they were getting off Instill Light. But yeah, just the fact that it's fairly cheap, the fact that they can use it as an action move, means that they can constantly keep themselves buffed. They've got good recovery options. They've got access to Exorcism, which actually their Exorcism gives them a free haste as well. So very solid class across the board. I mean, personally, I'd still argue. I think that's why Ravenous doesn't have access to White Knight anymore, because it would kind of be a win from the Paragon in my book, anyway. But yeah, so she's down here. If I'm wrong on any of this, by the way, bear in mind that so much stuff is shuffled around in so many different versions and whatever else, and there have been so many different runs that just kind of mash together, that yeah, there's a good chance I may have gotten some stuff wrong, but these are just like personal opinions off testing these classes and all kinds of different patches and versions and whatever else. It's been years of different updates. I get confused. Already barely sleep during most days, so there we go. Alright, so next up we have the Dark Priest. Solid A-tier caster just across the board. They get access to everything that you'd want them to. Their moves are... Well, actually, do we want to maybe move them? No, we're going to leave them at A. So yeah, solid A-tier caster across the board. Their action moves got upgraded, so they've got more shutdown potential behind them. Basically, instead of just doing Envenom from before, I believe it's like Silence and Shackle and Envenom or something. But yeah, so just basically offensive casual version is pretty okay. Arguably B tier because they're still a pain to get a hold of. Princess, on the other hand, definitely an S tier. Really good offensive stats, attack-wise. They're supposed to be middle of the board, but I can feel they're pretty dang strong. They are a caster that can actually function while still using tank gear. So personally, I like to do like heavy armor plus spear. So you've got Conviction, which is actually getting boosted up to 2 tiles. So you could potentially run up with a pike now. So essentially, do run up, use Conviction, get MP, use a pike, finish them off. Suddenly, you've killed off 1 unit. You've got yourself supercharged for the next round, and yeah, all the while there's still a frontline bulky unit. So very good potential there. I mean, there's a lot of folks that have mentioned different builds for her. Just personally, I feel like anything magic plus armor plus whatever you feel like adding is going to be pretty solid. So next we got Deneb with her wiki. I feel like it's a C now, again, just because it's a pain in the neck to get a hold of. It's less of a pain in the neck to get a hold of than before, and they're definitely one of the stronger casters, but, you know, you still got to go out of your way to get them. You've got a really good array of powerful casters available, so being able to self spellcraft is good. It's just not as good as it used to be. So she's still very strong, still worth getting, especially now that glass pumpkins don't require like days of friggin' grinding. Or the dragons. Man, screw the whole Hydra thing. Who decided that for vanilla? I don't even know. Some evil bastard for sure. So yeah, very solid there. On the flip side, I would say Warren over here with his Astromancer, solid S tier. I mean, the guy can warp and self-heal and self-recharge every time he does it, so he's got one of the best escape moves in the game. Plus he's got, I believe he's got access to pretty much every spell in the game. He actually makes getting him in the end game worth it. So I feel like he's the only one that's actually strong enough to justify how long it takes to get them. Alright, next up we got Shamans. Yeah, I feel like they're an A. They still punch really hard. They still got their 50% boost move. They've got a map-wide debuff that they can throw out as well. So, pretty solid. They don't really do a whole lot of support or anything, but I do feel like their overall punch is strong enough to make a case for going Shaman over Geomancer. Alright, next we got Songstress. Strangely enough, S tier. So yeah, as strange as it sounds, having a spellcaster build that can counter charm, very, very, very strong. Like, every time that I've gone and tested them, I could just basically recreate the same effect of having an entire team using charm darts and things like that, except with 1 unit. So you just have her, like, let's say you pick up your charm dance and stuff like that, you have them fly up to the... Alright, had a bit of a random thing come up there. But yeah, so basically what you do, you get your charm dance, you have them fly up into a crowd, use their mass charm, and then just watch as the charm guys go attack their own team. They all swarm on her, try to attack, makes use of their natural high evasion to repeatedly just slap stuff away with a frickin' guitar, potentially charming them in the process. Plus they've got Limelight, so potentially they're speeding themselves up, plus boosting their luck infinitely. so they can completely just break the game with their luck. It's amazing. So absolutely love that class. And then lastly, we've got the Lord, which, I mean, this can be a lot of different things. I feel like it's probably an A. Reason for this, so it may seem like a bit of an odd place to put him. His stats are very mediocre, I will say that. They're intentionally mediocre because he has way more access than before. He can use pretty much every piece of equipment in the game. He can use pretty much every ability in the game. You can make some absolutely busted combos, but you'll never really have the stats to fully back it up. So you can make some very interesting builds, like for example, like a counter Poison Spear guy or something else, or let's say, for example, you wanted to build this weird build that I made a while ago that was basically an Armageddon nuker, where it was whips plus at this point I would probably put Siege on there, plus Art of War, plus Mind's Eye, plus Og Dark, plus the like Gremlkin plus Dark Augmenting Gear. And then, yeah, you just basically put him in the middle of a crowd and just laugh as he dodges every single attack, and then finishes everybody off with a finisher. Oh yeah, you'd need TP2 on there as well, but either way. So, yeah, that's a guy that could throw out thousands of damage in a single round if built right, or they could be an absolute wet noodle. It's entirely on how you build them. So yeah, it's an absolute custom class. I'm going to put them in A tier because, yeah, they can be anywhere from S to D, depending on how you put them together. Alright, so unless I'm missing something, which I double-checked last night, I believe I got them all. So that should be all the classes in one vision. What do you guys think? How badly have I insulted some people's favorite classes? And yeah, let me know. So I believe next we'll be doing March of the Black Queen. So we'll be doing that, then Knight of Lotus, then OB64, and then we'll be doing the mods, and I think we'll just throw in Vagrant Story in there randomly. But anyway, so I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and talk to you soon.